So today we're going to be using the elevation parameter that's built into the MetaSound to switch tails between something that could be considered a tail from above and a tail from below. This is to help communicate to the player where the enemy is, something that I haven't seen before in many games or any games. So this is a sort of a new technique that I'm trying out. So yeah, let's just dive straight in. Let's go back to weapon shared tails MetaSound. And of course we want to add another section here specifically for height. So what are we going to do? First of all, we need to create again a new patch. So let's minimize that. Let's say we want a new patch, audio MetaSound patch. There we go. And this is going to be called MSP MetaSound patch trigger by height. 2 inputs. Why is it 2 inputs? Because one coming from above, one coming from below. There might be a time that we want something else, maybe 3 or 4, you know, depending on the angle that you're looking at. I think that's a little bit too granular for what we need right now. But because this is a patch, we can also use it for different sources. It doesn't just have to be weapon tails, it could be footsteps, creature sounds, is the creature above you, below you. So this patch can be used for multiple reasons. That's why we don't want to name this patch too specifically, because there might be other uses for it at another time. So once again, we have a complete blank slate. What do we need? We need a trigger. That needs to be a trigger variable. And then what are we going to do? We're going to have again a random, we need, what is it called? We can just actually copy and paste this random array, and we want one for the top and one for the bottom. Again, let's create an input, wave asset A, and then promote this to an input as well, wave asset B, easy. So that's A is above and B is below. So for this, just to make it a little bit neater, I'm going to do something a little bit different. What we're going to do here is we're going to have a map float in range. I have 2 of these. We need to add an interface here and have elevation. What is that? Spatialization. And we get the elevation. Okay, so what we need is, this needs to be an input. This is going to be our height from any MetaSound that we have. So let's promote this to an input, and the input is called elevation, and that's going to be a float parameter, and we want that to be from 0 to 180. Okay, so what we want is, we have our source over here, and if you imagine elevation, it will be, this will be 0, and then if you go up 1, that's 1 degree. And if you go all the way there, that's 180, and the opposite is true. So here is -1, and you go all the way down, it's -180. So yeah, it's basically this arc here. So what do we have this as? It's -180 to 180. Then what we want to do is we want to clamp the range, and A starts with, where do we want to start the fade in? So for this exact example, we might say, okay, height, we can call this height above fade in start, above fade in start. And we can put this up to 180, and we want that to be 1. Okay, so as soon as you start from 1 degree, it's going to start fading in the sound. And we want the same thing for height below. So we say promote to input and call this height below fade in start. The difference is, this is going to go from 1 to 180, and this is going to go from -1 to -180. Yep. So those are the 2 angles, right, that I showed you on the paint. This is going to be the input from our MetaSound. So that's called elevation. And we want to clamp this from maximum 180. We don't need that to be an input because we know the maximum is always going to be 180. And we know here the minimum is always going to be -180. Right, so, and then we just need to do a little bit of, to -1 to -180, and goes from 0 to 1. Okay, so this is like a little weird function, right? So as we're changing the elevation, we're getting a number from 0 to 1 and 0 to 1. Those are our clamped values. And then we want to promote this to a variable, and we can call this variable height below volume, clamped between 0 to 1. And the same again here, height above volume. Now, this might seem a little bit weird that we're having this outside of our other function here, but it's just so that we don't have like all this stuff like cluttering, you know, all mixed up. We can basically have this as like a little separate function here and call this our height fade. And that's already doing the calculation that we can then use in the mixer. So as we mix these two sounds together, we can get a stereo mixer with two, and put the audio in there, left and right, get our height above volume and chuck it in there. Okay, so sorry, I made a little mistake there. So this has to be height above fade volume, and this has to be height below fade volume. And these are gonna go here. Why is it going here and not in the mixer? Because you might want to actually change the volume of these assets later. And we want this calculation to work before the normalized 0 to 1. We want it to work before you get to the mixer and maybe decide to change this. Hey, no, I want this volume to be 2 and this one to be, you know, 0.5 or whatever, because your assets are, I don't know, maybe your assets haven't been rendered out at the same volume. So this is why we want to keep the mixer actually free from your calculation. So here we have the function to figure out exactly how we want to fade in and out the volume. And we get that by dragging this in. This is the below one. So we calculate it there. So yeah, basically as you start pulling down your elevation, it's going to bring from -1, which is like there, to -180. It's going to be bringing the volume from 0 to 1, and the opposite is true for up here. So as it goes above 1, it's going to clamp the range between 1 to 180, and then it's going to go from 0 to 1. So it's just basically controlling the volume or fading the volume in and out. And so above, multiply by audio, there we go, chuck that in there. Cool, so that's kind of just a sort of neat-ish way of having all your calculations being done while still giving you freedom to edit the volumes afterwards in case there's an issue. So we're actually going to turn this as well into an input, because I'll show you later. So this one can be called height above volume, and this one can be called height below volume. Okay, now you might think, okay, this is great. We can attach this to our shared tails, but actually there's a round of optimization we can do again here. So what do we want to do? We want to do the trigger compare again, trigger compare float, and we want our fade in start time, which is 1, and our fade in end time. Actually you don't even need to do that little safety tip that I gave in the previous tutorial. You can say greater than or equals 1, and we put that into here, and we get the elevation, and we say the same for this. Elevation goes into here. We take in the height below fade in time start. Make sure it's a capital for easy reading. Okay, so you get the height in start, there we go. And yeah, that has to be the B, and we say greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, less than -1 or equal to, then it's going to trigger. We put that in there, we put that in there. Why do we do that? So that basically when you're level, when the two players are facing each other and there's no height difference, you're not going to have the tail play at all. And to be honest, what we could actually do is say the height fade and start. We could maybe even just, let's put it to like 20 degrees or something like that, right? Because you don't really need to have these tails fading in until there's at least some kind of elevation or de-elevation. There you go, so this is our patch now. And also let's go here. So this little thing here, we can delete. This is on the crossfade by parameter. And we can say equals to or less than or equals. There we go. And same here, greater than, equals or greater than. And here, less than or equal to, and same with this, greater than or equals to, equals. There you go. And then, yeah, that's basically a much neater way of making sure that it always plays. Okay, so back to our trigger by height. Everything looks to be fine and dandy here. Let's save that. And then we go back to our shared tails. And what do we do here? We call the trigger by height by PEU. Okay, need to name that properly. Audio trigger by height, trigger by Right, and elevation, let's just put this elevation variable back to default 0 and save it. And let's go to our shared tails. You can always, whenever you see this error, you can always update node class here. And then here we want to get an interface. We want spatialization. And here we get the elevation. And we put that into our patch. Right, so here you can see all the values, wave asset A, B, height below. We probably need to, again, order these. So what do we want? We want trigger to be at the top. Then we want wave asset A to be next, 5. Height above fade in start. We can say, let's do 10. And then the volume, we can do 15. And then wave asset B, 220. And then below fade in start, 25. Volume, here we go, 30. And trigger. Okay, let's see how that works. Oh, but that's at the start. Oh, we need end as well, right? Promote to output, unfinished. And we can say any, trigger any to, oops, let's do it neatly. That doesn't necessarily have to be on your unfinished. It's just always better to have that in case. And of course, we need to promote, we need to audio outputs, don't we? Output L, output R. And if you really want, you can do the mono thing as well, but I'm going to leave it out for now. Right, now I think this is everything. Let's go back to our shared tails, elevation. You also, I don't know why this doesn't come as default, but you also need to set this up as minus 180 and plus 180, and you want the default to be 0, of course. And what are we going to do for the trigger? Trigger needs to be the top. Trigger, let's just do -5. I think you can do now minus numbers. Yep. So this is at the top, and again, what do we want the condition for this to be? It has to be outside for this to happen, equal to 0, yep. And if it's outside, then we can start figuring out if you're above and below, because we don't want these tails to change when you're inside a building, because, well, the tails sound like you're outside. So we need the trigger as well. Where's the trigger? Play UE sound, and what else do we need? Input. This is going to be below. What is this called? Height low. Okay. Should really name things more consistently. So this is called height low. This one is called, okay, no, this needs to be height high, because that's wave asset A. And we can also call this wave asset height, I would say above rather than high. Doesn't make sense. And input, actually let's follow the file naming conventions. Weapon tail height, weapon tail height above, and that has the height high, and that has the height low. Hicht. Cool. And again, we need this to go into the mixer. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, so now you hear that those tails are being cut off. I actually think that the tails that are just the land ones are cut off, unfortunately, on the sample level. But for example, this low tail is very, very long. So if we go here, do you hear how long that is? And then the high tail, much shorter. So now what we need to do, rather than have this trigger any, we're going to do something a little bit fancy, and that is we're going to create an envelope follower. We're going to add these two together, because it doesn't matter about the volume here in terms of output. We just want to make sure that both these channels are outputting a signal to the same place, and with that we're going to get an envelope follower, and that envelope follower is going to output a float, and that float is going to trigger on threshold, and we want it to be on the falling edge, so as the sound is reducing. So I guess in terms of ADSR, this would be release, I guess. And we want the threshold to be something very small, like 0.001. Okay, so once these two things are added together, we want to make sure that the combined volume is less than this 0.001 in terms of Unreal units, and then we can trigger the on finish. That means that when you have a short sample, there we go, it finishes at 3 seconds, and then when we have the longer sample, it will finish at 4.3 or whatever. And if we have none of these, and we go to room size, let's say 2, finishes at 0.7. You see? Okay, so this does come with an extra cost because you have to check the amplitude or the volume on every frame. But this does mean at least your MetaSound will end precisely when your tails finish. So even if you have a long one or a short one, the MetaSound will always finish at the correct time. And that's good for these highly dynamic MetaSounds that have a lot of different variables triggering different sound effects. Okay, so that is the end for our height above and below. The next step I'm going to take is adding our reference gunshot in there as well. And then from there I will also show how to do different attenuations within the MetaSound. So see you on the next one.